wherever you are and whenever you are, welcome, good souls of the planet and beyond, to Paranormal Now. I'm Alan B. Smith. Join us as we traverse the cosmic highway of paranormal portals and tantalizing turnoffs. Tonight on Paranormal Now, we'll be covering ET contact and visitation with Terry Tibando and discuss his book, A Citizen's Disclosure on UFOs and ETI, Global Evidence of the UFO and ETI Presence. So, hold on tight and say goodbye to Kansas. Please share your thoughts and experiences with us during or after this show on Facebook.com/ParanormalNowRadio, Instagram @ParanormalNow, Twitter @Paranormal_Now. And of course, please join us in the KGRA chat room, where it is a lively bunch of highly intelligent people who are here every week, hanging out on the KGR platform and actually informing us as we go along, an extraordinarily helpful part of this show and KGRA. So if you want to jump in and join that, we would absolutely love. You are welcome. Now, call-ins are available to all of you by using our HD toll-free phone line, sponsored by the Paranormal Radio app. So add this number to your mobile phone so you can call us hands-free at 855-472-5483. That's 85-KGRA live. Listen for your cue to call in and pose your question to the guest or myself, and make sure to save the new Paranormal Radio app hotline number, 85-KGRA live. Your ideas and inquiring minds matter, so the line is open for you well, I'll talk to Race in the first break. I'm thinking we might open the lines a little bit earlier, so, I'll get back to you on that. More fun chats about the strange and uncanny. You can go to the Paranormal Now sister program, Coffee and UFOs, on my YouTube platform, and that's youtube.com/paranormalpop. Please like, subscribe, and also check out the new The Breakdown on KGRA's YouTube channel as well. Go there, subscribe, like, hit the notification bell, comment down below. The more activity we can drum up on YouTube pages, the more the YouTube algorithms will respond and boost those videos. So even if you just want to say hi in the comments, do it, because it'll help us out. So thank you for that. I'm going to go right to Terry's bio here, and when we come back after the first break, I'm going to give you a little bit of an update on the UFO Monument Park. There's a video that I posted in the Paranormal Now Facebook page, and you'll want to see this town hall meeting. It's much better to watch the full video than me to sit here and try to describe the whole encounter. But things are moving along in that regard, and I'll update you a little bit more in just a moment. Terry Tibando's first book is called A Citizen's Disclosure of UFOs and ETI, Global Evidence of the UFO and ETI Presence, Volume 1, which covers the subject of UFOs and extraterrestrial intelligence. Although new to the literary world, his background and understanding of this phenomena spans over 60 years of personal UFO sightings and extraterrestrial contact, which began when he was 5 years old, followed by a lifetime of many other worldly sightings and encounters. Thus began a journey into the mysterious universe of unidentified flying objects, extraterrestrial intelligence, and the paranormal. Now, as an experiencer, researcher, and investigator in ufology, he is more than qualified to talk and write with some expertise on this topic, and we'll find out, Terry, in just a little bit how much of an expert you are. He was instrumental in coordinating, hosting, and emceeing the first Disclosure Project event on UFOs and ETs in Canada as part of Dr. Greer's Disclosure Witness Tour, held at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver on September 9th, 2001, which included guest speakers Dr. Stephen Greer, Dr. Carol Rosen, and Dr. Alfred Weber. For the last 25 years, Terry has led teams of people on field expeditions as the CSETI Vancouver coordinator, successfully establishing contact, and communications with extraterrestrial intelligences visiting the Earth. Obviously, this is not a strange topic for us here on Paranormal Now. But for those who might be tuning in for the first time, or for those of us who have a little bit of a skeptical streak, I really am curious to hear Terry's take on all this, because anytime somebody says they've contacted an ET, you have to give a moment of pause, and that's only fair. So, Terry, welcome to Paranormal Now, and I'd love to hear your story.
Thanks very much, Alan, for having me on your program. I'm looking forward to our talk together.
Absolutely. So I think with so many of us in this field, we've had a personal experience when we were young, and it got its hook in us and never left. And that's where I am, I can say, at least for myself. So what about you? Can you tell us a little bit more about that early part of your life?
Yeah, well, that happened back in November 1953, so I'm really dating myself. My father was in the Canadian Air Force, and we had been stationed around the country, and I was born in Victoria, BC, and we moved to Ontario, to the city of North Bay, where there was a military base there. And then we got moved again into Quebec, and we ended up on an air base called St. Jean's, Quebec Air Force Base. And it was in that location that my mother and I were taking my younger brother out for a walk, and he was only about a year old, so we were pushing him in a baby carriage and walking along the road on the Air Force site. And I noticed an object come in and hover over the top of one of the buildings. And I was very struck by it because it seemed to be unusual. And I said to my mother, "What's that?" And she looked at it and she wasn't really certain, but she figured it was an airplane. And at that point, when she kind of made that decision that there was nothing significant, the things zipped off. Now, one of the interesting things about that was that this was a daylight sighting. The object probably was no more than 500 feet away. It was round, black underneath or dark, dome-shaped with a cupola on top and a lighter on the top. That was my first sighting. Now, I didn't put anything unusual to it because I'm only a 5-year-old child. But I'd seen aircraft through my father as we had been moving around and onto military bases. And within a day or two, or an evening or two, I had ETs come into my bedroom. And at first I thought they were ghosts because they were moving right through the wall. And then in my mind, I thought, well, they're like little men, and very bright, very luminous, probably no taller than an 8 or 10-year-old child. Their faces and appearance was luminous, white. They had pupils. They didn't have these big oval black coverings or lens-like appearance. You could actually see their eyes, and this is why I thought that maybe they were like men, but because of the way they moved, I also equated them to being like Casper the Ghost. And that's probably the best description of what I saw. And I called out for my mother because I was in a sheer panic and upset that these beings or people were coming into the room. And she checked behind the door where where our bedroom was because that's where they had shown up, and there was nothing there. So she just said, "You're having a bad dream. It was a nightmare. So calm yourself down and relax. There's nothing there." So she left the room and went back into her room. And again, these little beings showed up. Well, now I'm really panicking.
Terry, let me pause you right there before we get too far along. So sure. I have a question. The eyes, now, was there anything like a contact lens?
No.
Nothing.
No, there were like large pupils, like almost like human eyes. That's the whole thing. Now, I'm going to tell you something. This predates anything of Barney and Betty Hill's event of their sighting and contact, because my experience predates that by 8 years.
Right. Well, the thing about people with the Barney and Betty Hill, They actually described more of like a cat-like feature of the eyes, and Whitley Strieber described in Communion, the typical gray as we see it now.
Yep.
So it is interesting that there's a sort of evolution. Did you think that these were aliens?
No, at the time I didn't think of them as aliens because I wasn't making the connection of what I was seeing in my bedroom to what I had seen a couple of days earlier with my mother.
Okay.
And so it wasn't until years later that I started to think back on this, and I was starting to see other craft flying around. But I'll just finish up that story quickly. So she comes back in, calms me back down, goes back out, and the third time, this time the beings are coming around the edge of the bed and up towards where I am, where the pillow is. And I thought, okay, I'm not going to cry, but I pulled the sheets over my head, figuring, well, if I can't see them, they can't see me, therefore they're not there. But there is something in the back of my mind that says those covers came off me, but I have no recollection after that. You also have to understand that I had a twin brother sharing the room plus my baby brother. Neither one of them saw anything. It was just my experience. And so the thing about these beings is that when we think of the traditional understanding of the short, diminutive gray-like entities, which we call the grays, and the black coverings, this to me has become more of a bit of a propaganda program in deception. Not that these beings don't exist, but we tend to think that they're the only ones out there. Mm-hmm. And in my case, I have established, in fact, I'm doing this right now, that there's at least 40 that I've accounted for, different types of species, based on reports from more than one witness or repeated sightings of these in different circumstances. And so the short little grays, though they may be real, are only one of the many species that are visiting this planet. We're actually getting species that are very tall. Some are 12 foot tall in height. Some are very diminutive, no more than a foot. Some are looking like robotic or something very exotic that's hard to put your finger on it. So there's a variety of ETs, and in my experience with this, what I'm usually getting is that I don't get a physical contact, but more of a holographic projection that comes across. Sort of an interdimensional interaction between them and humans.
Well, okay, let's before we go down that road, Terry, a little bit further. I just want to get a little bit more of your experience when you were younger. So you had this initial experience when you were 5.
Right.
And how did you process that afterwards?
Well, one of the things is that the next day we were talking about it, and everybody was laughing and having a good joke about it, and felt that I was just dreaming, and this was all just something of my own imagination. Mm-hmm. However, a lot of children between 5 and 10 will sometimes say, I'm going to be playing with my little roommate. And the parents will look at them and say, what are you talking about? There's just you in the room. Mm-hmm. And, well, the person comes out of the closet and we sit down and we play, and the person's name is such and such. And this could be a human. It could be something else. What I started to do was I started drawing pictures of rockets and planets and stars and things. And I had never any concept of any of this, but this is what I was drawing. And my parents thought that was unusual, given the nature of the fact that I'd never seen any rockets and I've never seen any planets before. So there appears to be some kind of a download of information on a subconscious level, and it stuck with me. And as I started to move around, I spent 4 years in England with my parents and came back to North Bay, Ontario. When I came back to North Bay, I had another daylight sighting of a silvery disc moving off in the distance. And I tried to look at it carefully, and I could not see any wings or any sound, or any tail, no propellers or jets. So this, again, was one of those situations where I was starting to see things that were not conventional to our atmosphere, not something that was man-made.
Okay. As the years went on, were there a multitude of experiences?
Yeah, there has always been sightings of almost wherever I was living.
Sightings versus, I guess you didn't have face-to-face contact.
No
Okay.
face-to-face contact other than that 5-year-old experience as a child. But what I was seeing was we had moved, like I say, right across the country in Canada over into Britain, spent 4 years there, and literally worked our way back to the West Coast. And when I got back to the West Coast, I had more sightings. And I was almost of the opinion that I was seeing too many in and around where I was living, whether this would be daytime or nighttime observation, almost to the point that I started to suppose or sort of have a suspicion that there may be an underwater base off the coast of Vancouver Island. Now, there's a lot of this talk where bases are off the coast of Catalina and off the coast of possibly New York and Bainbridge, I think it's, or Bodybridge in Scotland, and all kinds of places. So
in New York, we have off-worlders right here living with us.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Paul Hellyer, who was the former defense minister for Canada, said, yeah, we got at least 4 identified beings, and some of them are actually living on Earth with humans, which means that possibly one of those species is a humanoid or a human who could be our cosmic cousin. And that gives room for thought there because, when we see something very different other than our usual cultural differences, and we start to see things that are humanoid, but they don't look human, we question that. And we can make plans and have all kinds of protocols in place to deal with that. But when they start to look human, now we got a bit of a problem here because they can infiltrate any of our societies, any of our agencies, any of our governments and military, and we won't know who they are because they look human.
So they're not shape-shifting reptiles. They just
I don't know where that whole thought came from, a shape-shifting, because
other than David Icke, I don't know.
Well, there's a lot of things out there. Like, for instance, if we were talking about ancient aliens, a lot of that goes back to the Sumerians and what one author who wrote a lot of books, I'm just trying to recall his name, but it eludes me at this point. But he did a lot of work into the Sumerian language, the Hebrew language, and what he found was that he attributed a lot of potential extraterrestrial association with beings that were supposedly aquatic or fishmen or whatnot, and they gave us our basic understanding of civilization and culture and all kinds of manner of civilization. The problem is that a lot of people jump on the bandwagon and they think, oh, yeah, this guy's onto it. He's absolutely right. But they haven't done their own research. And so my mantra is go and do your own investigation. Do your homework. Don't just accept what's being put out there. If I say something, I want to be challenged on it. I want you to go and say, I've looked up 3 or 4 different sources, and they either confirm or deny what you're saying. Thank you very much, because what you've done is you've done your own investigation, and I hold that in higher esteem than somebody who says, I'm just going to jump on the bandwagon and accept what's ever being stated out there.
Were you referring to Zachariah Stitchin?
Exactly, Zachariah Sitchin. I actually met the man, and I listened to one of his talks in Seattle. And very interesting, but without denigrating the man, it was rather hard to listen to him because he was monotone. He was giving all kinds of information, but it was hard to sort of stay awake to a lot of what he was saying. I really wanted to hear what he had to say.
Oh, no, I can understand that. I had a history teacher where it was like he was speaking like this the entire class, so, every day. But because it was like that, it was somewhat humorous. And actually, it was, I'd get kind of like, enraptured into his storytelling. I enjoyed it where everyone else was falling asleep. But
yeah, I mean, I enjoyed his talks. I read his books, and I was excited when I first read them. But when you read these books, something says, okay, I'm going to see what else he has to say. I'm going to look up some of these quotes out of the Bible or some of these history books or whatever and see what I can find. And when I did, I started to realize that there was no real scientific support for what he said. There might have been some archaeological support, but the actual facts didn't quite jive with the description of what he was saying. And so, the thing is, in this business, everybody's got an opinion, everybody's got a thought, and I say, hey, that's what the world's made up of. There's some of them that have billion of us, we're all going to have a different thought. Hopefully, some of us can get together and share those thoughts and say, hey, I think we're on to something here. I think we're starting to coalesce the information into something that's meaningful, and we can back it up with scientific proof or religious historical proof or social and cultural proofs, all these kinds of things that will help us to say once and for all, this stuff is real. And that's what the book is all about.
Right. But when you're talking about one's own story,
right,
you have a solo witness event, you can write that down and pass that down, but how do you know when to take that for gospel or not? You don't. So what, it's hard when you're just an eyewitness or have a contact experience. How do you prove that?
That's right. And as a lot of us will have those solo experiences, which to me are meant just for the individual. When you have it in a group setting, which is what I have also had, and back in '93, actually, our organization, C-SETI Vancouver, which is in association with Dr. Stephen Greer's C-SETI in the States, we were one of the earliest groups to form in North America. I think another one was the Phoenix Group and one or two others in the States. And there's a group down in New Zealand that formed in roughly the same time that our group formed. Well, what we're doing is we're going out into the field, usually in an isolated location away from the high traffic, the street lights, the lights of the city or the homes, etc. Because what we want is a great environment that allows us to see the sky, to see the stars, and not have all this light pollution that goes on. And it's sometimes very hard. I know there's some great spots down in the States. In where I live, we get light pollution from not only Vancouver, but I live in what they call the Tri-City area, and we get lots of light. So we have to go off almost into the bush and look for an opening to do our work. And when we do that, then we start to see what's flying around, whether it's man-made, astronomical, or something unusual. And in those kinds of settings, this is where our group, who using meditation and higher consciousness, will reach out and try to make contact or connection mentally with these beings. Now,
let's hold it right there, Terry, because we're coming up to the first break. So this is a good place to pause it, and we'll pick it up when we get back from the other side. But I did think earlier when you were mentioning adults thinking you were just having an active imagination seeing these creatures. I had an imaginary friend when I was young. And at no point as I grew up did I mix that up with something that was real. So I think the idea that you could distinguish between having an imaginary friend as a child and something that actually happened is quite acceptable.
Exactly.
This is Alan B. Smith for Paranormal Now on KGRA Radio. We're just getting started, so hang in there. We will be right back.
Interactive alternative talk media, KGRARadio.com.
Welcome back to Paranormal Now. This is Alan B. Smith, your grateful host, taking us out of the break with Septembrio spelled with a Y.com. If you want to find out more about their awesome music. Tonight's guest is Terry Tibando. And man, we have a lot of ground to cover, and I'm excited that you're here with us, a part of this program. And anytime we talk about ET contact, we do have to sort of pace ourselves and take our time through that journey so that we can understand not only from the person who's telling us about that, their personal perspective, but the wider perspective and the implication of those things. So I'll get to Terry in just a moment. And I was shared this document earlier in regard to the UFO Monument Park. And this was dated June 26, 2019, legal document. Miss Lombard agreed on the location of the monument on September 18th, 2015, marking the site with orange spray paint, with the location clearly demarcated and site photographs taken by Tom Warner on behalf of Mr. Reed. You instructed Miss Lombard to obtain a letter from the farmer landowner allowing the town to place the monument on his property. That was done, and pictures were taken. There's a lot more coming, so I was a little bit hesitant of what I was going to share tonight. So I'm going to leave you with that. Next week, Tom Reed will come on at the top of the show to give us much more detailed information. But it's funny. This thing just keeps moving forward. And if you go to that video on the Facebook page, on Paranormal Now Radio Facebook page, you'll see how the town itself is having that internal conversation. And I don't want any of those town council people to feel like they've got the hot spotlight on them and feel slighted in any way if they think they're just doing their job the right way. The point is to go about it responsibly, which Tom Reed is, which in this case does mean legal action. So we'll see how this plays out. Again, I'm going to try to reserve as much judgment on this as I can publicly, that is. Now we'll move on to Terry. So Terry, when you're out in the woods, right? You had to go into this brush areas, these openings. What's the sensation? What are you building up to emotionally or mentally? Because, like you said, you mentioned meditation. I mean, how do you get yourself into this sort of state?
Well, I always ask my team members to practice meditation at home, even if it's for 15, 20 minutes a day. There's a lot of emotional, spiritual, and physiological benefits from meditation. And actually, meditation will also be the doorway to opening up the higher consciousness as well as the psychic abilities. And so it is not unusual for people who do practice meditation that they start to experience things beyond the normal five senses. The sixth sense, which is the psychic sense, which incorporates so many different aspects of the psychic being, which is part of our true nature. It's like a muscle that's never exercised fully. And so we try to get people into exercising that muscle. And part of it is sitting in a group setting, a circle, and essentially being silent, doing either a self meditation or having a person lead the meditation. It could be a recording, and Dr. Stephen Greer leading the meditation. What we're trying to do is elevate our consciousness to a higher level. And when we do this, this allows us to start to project our consciousness beyond the location, beyond the planet, out into space. And when we do that, we're hoping that when we have our consciousness out in space, we are able to make contact with ETs who may be in that area. We can project our consciousness right outside of the galaxy and into very deep space. But once we have that connection, what we're then going to do is do what we call remote viewing to see if we can see them with our mind's eye. And then we're going to vector them into our location, showing exactly where our star system is, our planet, third from the sun, what continent, whether it's day or night, and giving the ETs all the information we think are necessary to find us. We'll use lasers, beeps and tones, and we'll broadcast these beeps and tones with a walkie-talkie. So we're trying to use as many methods as possible in the way of communication modalities to get the ETs to come to our location. So this is a human-initiated contact, not an extraterrestrial-initiated contact.
Uh-huh. Now, how long do you think that this has been going on between us and them?
Well, I've been doing this for well over 25 years. Dr. Greer's been doing it for about 28 to 30 years. It's happening globally with different groups. We've got now thousands of groups around the planet. The ideal situation, of course, is if we've got 7.5 billion people, what we'd like to get is at least 1% of that, which is 75 million people doing this. Now, that's a big number in itself. But if we had 75 million people doing this, there's a snowball effect. And all of a sudden, there are changes taking place on a sort of subtle level where it's like if there were 200 monkeys on an island and there's another island with 200 monkeys. If the monkeys started collecting seashells and doing something like fishing, the monkeys on the other island, for some mysterious reason, will start to do the same thing. So there's a snowball effect. And that's what we're tuning into. That's what we're clicking into and trying to get people to recognize what's happening, that we're being visited. Now, the history books, when it comes to the UFO literature, is full of this stuff. And therefore, like in my book, what I do is I show the ancient perspective. I dabble or touch on a little bit of the ancient astronauts, ancient aliens. I go into the cultural mythology, beliefs of various cultures, even the religious aspects, because there are one or two religions that talk about this, and a lot of others that sort of open to the concept that there's maybe other life forms out there. And we move through the book trying to essentially get people to understand what are the types of objects that are man-made or natural, like cloud formations or star constellations, or things that fly, whether they're aircraft, etc., etc. Get them to become good witnesses of those common events, so that when they do see something that's unusual, now we can start to apply some of the. Well, it's not an airplane. It's not an airplane because it didn't have fuselage or two wings or a tail. It had no jets or it had no propeller. It was silent. All these kinds of things. This opens up the possibility that what we're maybe looking at is something not of this earth. And so by becoming aware of the conventional things that fly, we now become better witnesses. And so when somebody questions us and says, well, he doesn't have a PhD, he's not from the military, he's not from one of the fire departments, police departments, etc., therefore he's just an average citizen. It's usually the citizens that see these things first, and then they let the various agencies of officialdom know what's going on. They're always the last one to figure out what's going on. So by being a good witness, now we're giving credibility to our sightings and to our accounts. And that's what a good portion of the book is made up of. And then we move beyond that into what I call the actual evidence from around the planet, the various countries, the number of reports they see, whether those are things that are flying, whether it's ET contact, whether it's a single witness or it's multiple witnesses. And we run through a lot of countries. And that's a good third of the book or more that discuss the global evidence of the ET and the UFO phenomena. And then what I do with the rest of the book is I start to break down the categories of UFOs that are seen, which are really extraterrestrial spacecraft. And what we should learn to try and do is to wrap our heads around the new term, ETBs. That is extraterrestrial vehicles, as opposed to calling them UFOs, UAPs, and God knows whatever other alphabet soup that comes up from the military officials.
Right, but look, when you're sort of like grasping at the air, and because you don't really know exactly what you're dealing with it, of course you're going to have all these variations of terminology. Now, when you first get that sensation that you are making contact, what is that? How do you know?
It's like a sixth sense in that, for instance, when we had our group together back in '93, we had a couple of years where we went out into the field and ran through the protocols, which they call this the CE5 protocols, which is the Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind. Again, a term that was designated by Dr. Stephen Greer. Most people are aware of Close Encounters of the First, Second, and Third Kind. The fourth kind is usually being attributed to abductions, but actually, again, it's a bad way of coining that fourth close encounter, because it's really a sighting and possible interaction with extraterrestrial intelligence. When you get to a CE5, now you're talking about a human-initiated contact. That means we're taking control of the situation, and we're not allowing it to just happen.
Or are you just initiating?
Well, that's right. We're initiating the situation. So we're trying to vector in these spacecraft into the area of our choosing. And this has happened. I was on the Discovery Channel back a number of years ago, and I think it was 96, and I had been interviewed up on top of Cypress Mountain, just on the outskirts of Vancouver City. And as we were setting up, and we had a feeling that something was going to take place. It was intuitive, but we couldn't put our finger on it. And as we're setting up the cameras, all of a sudden, as I'm facing the fellow that's interviewing me, over his shoulder, I see this object appear over the ridge of the mountaintop and drop down. And I could hear the back chatter off to one side and say, look, do you see that? Do you see that? And they were seeing what I was seeing, which was a white orb or a white disc, but it was about a mile away where there weren't any lights, and it was just at dusk. And I thought to myself, do I tell the cameraman to turn around and point their camera at the object, or do I go for credibility? I went for credibility. The moment I did that, the object went over the top of the ridge and it was out of sight. However, for the rest of the demonstration that we did with the Discovery Channel, we had flashes of light moving around us that weren't a part of our equipment. It wasn't a part of the Discovery TV crew. So we had all kinds of weird things happening. And as we left the mountaintop and headed back down into the city, we were paced by a large triangular-shaped craft that essentially had initially two white lights, and then a third white light appeared, and then a red light appeared. And so this was what we would refer to as a triangular-shaped craft. And we could see that there was some understructure, and it was following and pacing the cars. And I said to the driver, wherever it goes, you're going to go and follow it. We're going to get as close to this thing as possible and see if we can make contact. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, where we saw it, it was just over the Vancouver area, and then it went across what they called the Georgia Strait to Vancouver Island towards an area which I think is Comox or Courtney, and then we lost sight of it altogether. But that was a very good sighting. So it was like we saw the small craft and we saw the large craft, could have been the mother craft, and it was letting us know that they were aware of what we were doing. And we've had other events like that, similar, up in the same area where we had large triangular-shaped craft that looked like flying Christmas trees, and very, very unusual. And then in one of the other locations, we had actual ETs come into the area where their craft is what they call on the crossing point of light, where they're not quite visible and yet they're sort of invisible. And sometimes you see them, sometimes you don't. These craft, because of their technology, which is interdimensional, they can actually land their craft right on top of the group. We wouldn't even know it. But what does start to take place is we can start to smell fragrances that are not a part of the environment. We get a sense of feeling, a sense of presence. We get things suddenly will get shifted around like physical objects of our own. We've actually had people, including myself, where they come up and start touching us. And
wait, they came at the craft touched you, or
no, the beings.
Okay.
So this is rather interesting because on one occasion we were out, and it was in I think early February, mid-February one year, and as we're sitting there, we could feel like insects crawling on our hands and our face. But there is no insects at that time because it's nearly freezing outside, and yet here we are under the environment, and we're getting this interaction. And then we get these strange beeps or tones or like metallic crickets moving around, but they're above us, and you could follow them with your ears and know exactly where they are. These are monitoring devices of the ETs. They're monitoring the group.
Terry, Betty and Barney Hill had heard sort of like a beeping, buzzing kind of sound during their experience. Have you read those descriptions? Does it remind you of that at all?
I have read some of that stuff. I've actually got a couple of the books, The Exeter Experience, and how the therapist was doing regressive hypnosis with them to help them recall. A lot of our experiences are based on conscious memory. There's nobody here that's ever been abducted. Nobody's had a medical examination or probing. Nobody's missing time. In fact, when we're finished our evening's event, most of us go away having a positive experience, either having seen something flying around, could be what they call the light bulbs flashes up in space. It could have been just a satellite, or in other cases, very bright lights that come very low and start moving around. So the thing is, what I'm saying here is our experiences are positive and nothing negative or untoward that wasn't asked for, which therefore begs the question, when you're talking about abductions, what's really going on? And there's a lot of this, the whole abduction phenomena has literally created a polarization in the UFO community that got people on either side taking position, saying it's very real, and others saying, well, we don't think it's real, we think it's military involvement, military abductions. And there's proof of that, because we know that through our own CSETI research that, one, when they had done crash retrievals and were back engineering the craft, you got to know they were back engineering the ETs that were on board that craft, something that's never talked about as a rule.
And Terry, you're referring to the recovery of 1947 Roswell?
Roswell, yeah. I was born 1 year after that event, but I had my experiences. But the thing is, there are much better cases than Roswell. Roswell is one of those things that happen, but they've been trying to chase after it years after the event occurred. Mm-hmm. If you talk about Varginha, Brazil, where Adama Gervais, I think Gervais, he was half an hour behind the experience as it was unfolding. And they had ETs being witnessed by multiple people. And these were being rounded up by the military and by the fire department. That is a better case than Roswell, which we had to track it down to find out what was going on. And every time we thought we got somewhere, somebody threw up a roadblock of sorts and said, no, this was the Air Force throwing dummies out of the airplane, or it was the Mogo balloon, and this and that. But there's never been a denial as to what took place in Varginha, Brazil. And that's just one of many cases. So crash retrievals happen all the time. But what goes on is they take the DNA of the alien being and they look at it and they examine it and they see whether there's a similarity between that and humans, and they try to see if they can clone it, replicate the DNA. And it's gotten so sophisticated that now what we get is hybridization, where they take the DNA of an ET and a DNA of a human and maybe even a cow, and because cows are very similar to humans, and they reproduce a being that looks very much like the small greys or
are
like
you
the
saying that
reptilians.
Are you saying that they can do that, or that they are?
Yes, they've been doing it for years. And the problem is not enough people are doing their research. I had to track this down myself. There is a witness by the name of Barry King, who used to be a security officer in Peacemoor, United Kingdom, who worked at an underground laboratory. And he said when he was in the hallway, he said he saw two men in suits bring this tall, reptilian-like being down the hallway, and they didn't give this guard a second look, and they went straight down the hallway to wherever they went and disappeared out of sight. He said that this being, which was reptilian, looked like it was close to 7 feet tall. He said it looked so strong, he felt that it could have bounced him off the ceiling and taken care of the two guys who were guarding him. Wow. Now, what he's saying is, he said he's seen the laboratories where they are mass producing these beings, both reptilian and what we call the greys. These are what they will refer to as terrestrial extraterrestrials.
Gotcha.
In other words,
What year
programmable life forms.
Sorry, Terry. What year was that?
This would be back in the 60s. And
slicing in the 60s, which means they were hiding that technology for all those decades?
Yeah, that's the whole thing. You know, the point is, when you go back to the Second World War, the Germans had contacts with extraterrestrials. In fact, their Wunderwaffen or weapons were part of that alien technology. There was a crash out in the Bavarian Black Forest area back in 1936, I believe it was, and they had retrieved the material and the vehicle, as well as the live beings that were there. And it was those live beings who were helping the German scientists to create some of their weapons, including the rockets, and they were trying to build the disc-shaped craft. There actually is, for instance, you must have heard about this, of the various Varil and the Hanabu experiments of flying discs, which they built and flew. And I've actually got a video of one flying. So that's very rare. And that came, once again, out of Dr. Greer's movie, Unacknowledged. And it shows this craft with a German insignia on it going down a tarmac leaving a shadow on the ground as it was moving. And this was a Hanabu 2 disc-shaped craft. Mm-hmm. Now, here's the whole thing. This suddenly brings into focus why there was a mad rush at the end of the war by the Americans, the British, the French, the Russians, even some Canadians, where they went into Germany to grab whatever they could, the scientists and the technology. That's why through Operation Paperclip, when the Americans got these 1,500 Nazi soldiers back into their country, one of them was Warner von Braun and Dr. Oppenheimer and Hermann Oberth. And they asked him, how were you able to achieve this? And Hermann Oberth said, we had help. And he said, what do you mean? We had help from them, pointing his finger upward. He's saying that we had help from the ETs.
Okay.
And now this is all documented. This is the beauty about the whole thing. If you
not have been referring to God or the angels or heavens.
No. He's talking about ETs. And this is why, for instance, a lot of this German soldiers and whatever V-2 rockets were taken out to the American Southwest, near Los Alamos and White Sands, and they started reconstructing this stuff. And
Terry, let's hold it right there. We're at the second and last break tonight, and we'll continue in the second hour with no interruptions. And we will also open up the phone lines to everybody listening out there for you to call in. It gives you plenty of time to get your thoughts together. And I'm really curious if you've had an experience similar to Terry's, where you've been able to communicate directly with what you believe is an extraterrestrial. So that number is 85-KGRA Live, the Paranormal Radio app line 855-472-5483. This is Alan B. Smith for Paranormal Now. We will see you on the flip side.
Been lost in a bad way. I've gotta let you go.
You're listening to the KGRA Digital Broadcasting Station, Salt Lake City, Utah, Van Buren, Arkansas.
Lost in a bad way, cost me my family. Chaos around me, can't hear my heart say, hey, that's the wrong way. Hey, that's the wrong way. Hey, that's the wrong way. That's the wrong way. Lost in a bad way, starting to let go. gone too far the wrong way.
Welcome back, good friends, one and all, to Paranormal Now. This is Alan B. Smith, your grateful host. Thank you for joining us once again. I do want to apologize again for last week's technical problems. I didn't do that at the top of this show, and I did not want to forget that we did not forget. We did not forget. But look, KGRA is growing, and it's growing fast, which means lots of update to software, equipment, expansion, new stuff. The TV aspect of all this is growing at the same time. So there is a wide bandwidth, and I mean that in all possible ways, to cover. And KGRA and Race and Wade and the producers are working really hard to give you the best content that they can. So look, we had a little glitch. Apologies, but as always, we will always do our best to do right by you. So thank you again for tuning in tonight's show. And don't forget now, for this full hour, we have the Paranormal Radio app line open. So we're experimenting. It's all you. If you call in, if you have a story similar to what we were talking about, or if you have a question for Terry, you can call 855-472-5483. That's 85-KGRA Live. And a reminder that taking us out of the break was Septembrio.com. Septembrio with a Y. Really quick, Terry, do you know Dr. Joseph Burks?
Yes, I do. In fact, he was one of the original members of C-SETI with Dr. Greer, and he came up to Vancouver and actually got our group basically united and harmonized and focused in a proper direction. And we have communicated from time to time, but yes, I know him very well.
Yeah, he's a great guy. We shared the airwaves together on Epic Voyages Radio back on the old Inception Radio Network. That's how we got to know each other, and he's been on Paranormal Now a few times. So his story, as you were telling yours, I thought they had to have crossed paths at some point.
Yeah, he was actually, when the Discovery Channel was down and touring North America, they went to LA and they talked to him on the streets. I guess he had an hour or a few, a little bit of time off. Anyways, he said, I'd love to take you out. However, if you contact Terry Tibando up in Vancouver, he probably will be more than willing to take you out and show you the mechanics of what we do. And that's what he did. So, yeah. No, really great doctor. I like his thinking. He's very much a world humanitarian.
Oh, he certainly has a huge heart and is full of compassion, for sure.
Yes. Very intelligent man.
So I do want to continue on with what you think is happening with the abduction experience. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, basically what we have been able to determine, and I'm not, the one that's come up with this. All I have done with my book is I tried to gather up all the jigsaw puzzles pieces, and I try to put it together to make a big picture. In other words, connect the dots and try and understand what we're dealing with. So this is really an overview, and this first volume is really a primer to all the other 5 remaining volumes, because when you understand this first basic text, and it's 840 pages, and it looks rather intimidating because it's a big book, 6.5 pounds, and it's written very factually. It is almost of the same quality caliber as a university text, and unfortunately it has a university type price. But for those who really want this sort of thing, it is nothing like that's out on the bookshelves and the UFO literature. You pick up this book, it's heavy, you flip through it, and you say, oh my God, it's got pictures all the way through this thing, and documentation and descriptions of the pictures and events and all of this. And so what you feel like is, hey, this is really like an encyclopedia where you can go and refer to it. Mm-hmm. When you and in one of the chapters, I talk about the the extraterrestrial hypothesis versus the other hypothesis. And one of the things I touch on is the alien abduction phenomenon, because it really has created a dichotomy in the UFO literature and the UFO community. And I've actually had people who've had abductions get very angry with me when I try to tell them that I'm with CSETI and that I believe that some of their abductions is military derived or some covert agency. Now, the problem here is I would never dispute and say your experience wasn't real. It is real to you as my experiences are real. Whatever you took away from that is what you took away from it. But what I'm also suggesting is there may be more to this than just the loss of time, the possible medical invasive procedures that went on, being astral traveled out of your room or out of your house or taken physically and taken on board a spacecraft. I've never had that, so I can't really say I understand fully, although I have read accounts like Travis Walton who had such an experience. But even he has come around and said, this was not an abduction. This was a life-saving event, and it was my life that was on the line here, and the ETs helped to make sure that my health was back to being normal. Now, I brought up a third hypothesis that may have actually solved the differences between those who say it's military abductions and not ET and those who claim it's extraterrestrial. And that is what I refer to as the Human Preservation Program hypothesis, HPPH. And what I mean by that is, like humans, we have our scientists running around collecting up seed samples of every kind, and we're putting them into cold storage vaults in various locations around the planet, because they fear that given our current situation, we're not really out of the woods yet in terms of another possibility of World War III, whether that be nuclear, biochemical, whether that's even, it doesn't exclude the possibility of natural disasters, a possible asteroid hitting us, etc., etc. So they're saying we got to preserve whatever plant life is on this. And I suspect that they probably are even doing this with animal life. They therefore also must figure that a few humans will survive whatever is thrown at us, no matter how tragic. If we were to suddenly lose 3/4 of this planet's population, there would still be perhaps 1/4 of the population left, or maybe much less than that. However,
there would be survivors.
Yes, there would be survivors. Now, the ETs are taking a similar point of view. What they're doing is they're running around collecting all kinds of plants and samples and specimens, not only of plant life, bioform life, rocks, earth, you name it, including human DNA, sperm, and ova. Now, the alien abductionists will say, oh, see, that just proves our point. That's what they've been doing. They've been collecting all this stuff, and they're doing hybridization and creating all kinds of life forms. I try to stay away from that because I haven't got the proof to say one way or the other. But what I'm giving you is there is recorded documentation of ETs picking up all kinds of things off the ground, whether it be blades of grass or flowers or pine cones or whatever you want. And they're being witnesses to this event. One of them, which Jacques Vallée talks about, it happened in Valençon, France, where a farmer of a lavender field, Marcel Massé, went and was checking out his lavender crop, and he came across a couple of beings in their spacecraft in the field. And as he approached them, they pointed some kind of a stick or rod at him, and he froze in place. He was still conscious, still able to see what was going on, but what he noticed was they were sampling his lavender, right? And then they got into their craft, and then it took off, and that was the end of it. And then he was no longer under the influence of the hypnotic or paralytic type ray. Mm-hmm. So what this is only one of many examples. And so what they're doing is they're collecting up bioforms on this planet because they feel that we can still destroy ourselves. And their fear is that humanity has, when they started building nuclear weapons and stockpiling them and nuclear storage bases and all the rest of it, it's like the kids found the matches to the fireworks. And now all hell is possible to be let loose on this planet. So they're in their wisdom, which we are only just starting to figure out, is, okay, so those who claimed who had their DNA taken or their sperm and their ova taken may actually be the lucky ones. By that I mean that it will be their DNA, their sperm and ova that may be used to repopulate the Earth or another planet, should this planet be destroyed. And so their DNA samples will be the new Adam and Eve somewhere else on some other planet. Well, it only takes maybe a couple of thousand years without humanity on this planet for the Earth to get back to the way it was. But the thing is that mankind's influence on the Earth is devastating, particularly now when we've got all kinds of climate crises happening left, right, and center. We've got people who are trying to deny it. Some of them are scientists, and there are scientists on the other side saying, no, this is very real. I'm going to tell you something. I flew on the west coast from Vancouver up to an area called Terrace up north of British Columbia. And when I flew back along the coastal mountains. There wasn't any snow or ice on those mountains when I was coming back. In fact, what was originally ice or glacier was now lakes. You tell me that there isn't any global warming going on. Those are usually snow-capped mountains. And that's the problem.
Well, there are pockets here and there where there's some glacial growth, and that's
this was the coastal mountains are a long range of mountains, and then the next range after that is the Rockies.
Right. Climatology is very complex, and I would complex. Like, if you don't believe in humans, at the least further affecting any climate change, whether it be natural, right? Yep. If you don't think that humans are not affecting it to some degree, I always struggle with this idea of why are we still addicted to fossil fuels? Why do we? People forget under Nixon's administration, rivers were being poisoned.
Yep.
From toxic runoff from factories and facilities. You know, there was no politics in that. All Americans were united. This stuff is poisoning our communities. Let's do something about it. It's only in recent years that it's been polarizing, and I find it just so odd because we all want clean air and clean water at the bare minimum.
True enough, and the problem is that. I worry about my daughter, and I'm sure that every parent will worry about their kids who are now in their 20s. Maybe some of them are turning 30, and they may not even have another 50 years left on this planet because we know that oil is running out. Eventually, it's going to disappear. We know that we're wiping out jungles, particularly in the Amazon. BC has been doing a lot of logging. I'm sure there's logging going off in Russia and other countries, and this is the problem, is that we're supposed to think about the generations, at least 7 generations down the line, and their future. But all we do nowadays is we think about ourselves. It's all about me. And the problem here is that ETs are observing this, and they're recognizing that, we got a very selfish group of beings who can be highly intelligent and make their world a better place. When we look at alternative energies, for instance, we know that back in the time of Nikola Tesla, he ran a Pierce Arrow car without any fuel in it whatsoever, without any batteries. He took the energy right out of the earth, put it into some kind of a rectifier electronic device, and the car ran. That was over 100 years ago.
Yeah, well, I think it was, Terry, maybe I'm wrong and misremembering this, but wasn't it Benjamin Franklin that at least participated in the invention of a steam run car?
Yeah, I mean, cars, believe it or not, go back to the 1600s, if you can imagine that. What they ran on was probably steam or some kind of mechanical, maybe it was like a Fred Flintstone where they ran with it, or maybe they pedaled it or whatever. But the thing is, cars are very ancient. But the technology today where we have combustion fuel engines, which we've not needed that for the last probably 50 to 100 years, and yet we're still stuck on that grid system, and we're forced to buy into it because the powers that be say we need that. If they really want to make a difference on this, all the automobile manufacturers have to do is saying, hey, we're no longer working with the oil company. We're divorcing them. We're going to start putting out nothing but electric cars, nothing but steam-powered cars, nothing but water-powered cars. Or, in this case, what I would like to see is zero-point energy, which is something that Nikola Tesla was working on. And there are still scientists today that keep making the breakthrough globally on this. And they try to patent their invention. The moment they do that, they lose the patent because they get the national security clause is thrown on it, and you can't discuss it with your friends, your family, your neighbors. You can't write about it. You can't show videotapes. And if you do, you are threatened. You could be in prison, and God help you, you could be killed for it. And that's your invention.
If you've recently tuned in, you're listening to Terry Tibando. He's our guest tonight. His book is called A Citizen's Disclosure on UFOs and ETI, Global Evidence of the UFO and ETI Presence. Terry, where would you like people to go to find out about your book?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you asked that, because that's really the important question of the whole evening. Yes, you can go to Amazon and order it off of Amazon. It's both in hardcover and softcover. You can go to Barnes & Noble. You can go to Books A Million. Those are just to name a few in the States. In Canada, it would be Indigo, in Chapters and Coles. Basically, you order the book in, and they'll bring the book in to you. I'm still working on it because it's a new book. I'm still working on getting the books into the bookstores, at least up in Canada here. And I've already sold books in Britain. I've sold books down in the States. I've sold them locally here in Canada, and so it's the word is getting out, as it were, on the book. And I would say that this is a reference manual. So if you know a particular subject, say Project Blue Book, for instance, and you want to get more information, you would go to my book, and I will give you not only what I have found, but I'll give you the references to everything else that's out there. So what was initially started when I started writing this book as a 3,500-page tome, I had to break it up into 6 volumes. All the references, bibliography, webliography, etc., when you go to that, you actually get a 10,000-page book. So that's the kind of effort. This is an 8-year project that I spent writing it, 2 years of editing it, and at least a year trying to get it out into print.
Well, for reading material, that's a long vacation.
It's a long vacation, but people should not be intimidated by what they're seeing. This is going to the only one I can compare to was I think it's Jerome Clark, who wrote a encyclopedic, I think, two or three volume work. Well, this is double that, maybe even more so. And as I say, I wrote it all at once because I felt the time was right to get the information out. And if I didn't, it was never going to get done. And what I found was all of my traditional values that I thought were correct suddenly got tossed aside because I realized there's a corruption in the UFO database that people have just assumed was accurate, but wasn't. For instance, I'll use the example of the Ancient Aliens. And it's a very entertaining program when you watch it on TV. Unfortunately, it's infotainment. That's what it is. It's not real scientific work. It's what if the theorists of Ancient Aliens speculate or say, or what I prove is, look, and when you talk about Zoroaster, when you talk about Buddha or Krishna or some of the other ancient Mesopotamian beings or the North American, Mesoamerican traditional beliefs who are worshipping Quetzalcoatl, Kukulkan, Viracocha, etc. These were manifestations of God. They weren't space aliens. And these people brought enlightenment to the planet. Every deity or every manifestation of God who represents the supreme being will say, look, I say this not of myself, but one who chooses to speak through me, and therefore I'm only the mouthpiece to what he wants. And so when you get it, this brings up all kinds of other things. People say, well, ET's made us. Well, okay, let's look at the supreme deity then. Nobody knows who or what it is, but
sure,
all religions basically give credence and acknowledgement that he created us. Well, maybe God is the supreme extraterrestrial intelligence, in which case, yeah, extraterrestrial intelligence did create us. But it was the supreme being, as he created life on all planets and all star systems and all galaxies throughout the universe.
Well, that is interesting. And what if it turns out that that's what God is? Right? God is still an omnipresent.
But it's not. But it's not a physical. It's not a physical entity. In fact, the Bible had it right. God is a spirit. End of subject.
Well, but if we get really creative in our speculation, and we speak in terms of like a quantum universe, or holographic universe, rather, so God could be an entity, not physical like you and I, right? But a consciousness that invented and created all these things, and it literally is everywhere, almost like a computer software program.
Yeah, that's the current understanding today. Now, I'm a member of the Baha'i Faith, as is Dr. Stephen Greer, and I think Joseph Burks was or is, or I'm not certain that he was. But the thing is, what we're saying here is like in our writings, it says God is an unknowable essence. No amount of searching will reveal God. All the doors are barricaded. Man will never know. And you could spend the rest of your time trying to figure out what is incomprehensible. In other words, if I create a table or a chair, I am the creator of that chair. But that chair and that table has no more consciousness or ability to understand who created it. So in that sense, humanity has being somewhat finite in comparison as a creation, cannot comprehend the creator. That's just the way it is. And it's something we have to wrap our heads around, because as long as we keep trying to deify and personalize God, or God as a man with a white beard sitting on top of a mountain or whatever, then we're running into what we call man-made constructs or anthropocentric thinking. And we have to move away from that.
All right. If you have questions about the universe or God, you can call in at 855-472-5790. 5483. That's the Paranormal Radio app line, 85KGRA live. We are asking the big questions. I didn't know we were going to go there tonight, Terry, but here we are.
Bring them on.
So here's the thing. I kind of teased about this a lot. But people refer to God in a lot of traditions as the Father. But I always thought it was odd because in the Bible early on it describes God as unknowable. So why a male terminology? And I wonder, was it out of convenience? Just say it that way, or is there some reason?
Yeah. Well, listen. If I brought my wife down here, she'd tell you the problem with the way the world is operating is it's all run by men, and the problem is some women who will stand and say, "Well, what if God is a she?" Well, God doesn't have gender. That's the whole thing. Right. God is beyond that. But the thing is that when we talk about He as God. We're going back, at least in the Western Hemisphere, back to traditional Christian values, where the Roman Catholic Church, for instance, decided that God, when it was written down, was a he, a him sort of thing. And that's the way it was understood. Now, we kind of all accepted that, and we got along, and there wasn't any problem. And in fact, I think most other religions view it in a similar fashion. If you get to the traditional values of say Native Americans or the indigenous people of Australia, the Aborigines, or South America or Africa, they have a very close understanding with their creator, and they don't see it as a him or a her, and they are in tune with their environment. They make sure that conservation is a practice that every child is raised to understand and brought up to do as an adult. It's only the Western Hemisphere and some of the more materialized or developed nations that fight against all of this. Mm-hmm. And so in this day and age, we need to swing back towards a more gentler time where there is less violence, where there is more spiritual qualities. I'm not talking about religious institutions that vie and compete and are combative with one another, but those that actually work together and they sit down and say, I've read through your book and I understand what your book is saying, and it's right along the same lines as my belief. The only difference is who it was talking about at that particular time. Well, all religions come from God, the supreme fountainhead of all knowledge. In fact, science and religion, according to the Baha'i faith, are one and the same thing. One is knowledge through scientific discovery and invention. The other one, religion, is through inspiration and revelation. But they both are knowledge, and the knowledge of all things comes from the supreme source, whatever that may be. And that's the takeaway here. I'm not trying to push the Baha'i faith. I'm just saying it's another religion for this day and age that answers a lot of questions that perhaps some of the other ones don't answer.
Now, in your book, earlier you had mentioned it's packed full of images. When you went on these expeditions, are you still doing contact work?
Yes, I still take a group of people out all the time.
Okay.
Let me just say this, that sometimes this is a hit and miss type of proposition. And it depends. Anybody can do this, by the way. You gather together 3, 4, 5, 6 people or so. And basically you get together and you practice some meditation and get the basic principles and protocols down. And one of the good ways of doing this is Dr. Greer has a cell phone app called Contact Tool. It's got everything in it that you need to know to run a group. So what you're doing, therefore, is you're synchronizing everybody in that group to work in harmony and to be on the same page. When you are in that state of mind where everybody is synchronized and you're putting out this higher mental consciousness into the universe, you will get a reply. The universe always responds to us. Whether this be scientific or religious, it's like the universe is infinitely bountiful. Why not take your share? Nobody says you have to have it all, but you can take whatever share you need in order to fulfill your being on this planet, your spiritual growth, your intellectual growth, your physical growth, your health. All of these things can be a part of your being. But if you've got somebody holding you back or somebody else trying to control it all, then obviously you're not being entitled to what we are all supposed to be entitled to.
And what are we all entitled to?
Well, essentially, the thing is that we're entitled to an education. We're entitled to believe whatever we want to believe. We're entitled to live in harmony with one another, to work together in harmony with one another, to build an ever-advancing civilization, a civilization that is built on unity and trust and justice, and peace is the result of all of that. You don't have peace as the foremost front-end object that you try to attain to. You have to have a plan. You have to have a working plan. That means that if you are going to reach, say, a certain stage, you have to go through each of the steps in order to get there. It's like when people say, let's all stand up and march against the climate changes and the problems that are occurring. Well, this is all great, but what's your backup plan? What are you going to do when you got the people together? How are you going to fix the problem? Who are you going to contact? It isn't just marching and making a lot of noise. And as much as that seems like, well, you unified people on one level, but you haven't got them working on another level. And that's true of anything we do as human beings. So,
I have a follow-up question for you, Terry, on that in just a minute, but we have our first phone call. So we're going to go now to Ron from Minnesota. Ron, welcome to Paranormal Now.
Hey, Alan, how you doing? Great show. Thank you, Terry, for being on the show tonight.
Hi, Ron.
I did a little show on, I have a radio station. I'm not going to say the name, but anyway, I have a little radio station, and we do talks on Friday night, and I ask some questions sometimes, and this last week, I asked a question about skepticism. What do you do with the skeptic when you are talking about your experiences? Have you had more than one experience? And then how do you try to convince anyone, or do you just tell them your story and let it go with that?
Yeah, that's the interesting thing about life is, we're going to find that there are going to be people who agree with us, and there are those who will not agree with us, no matter how factual and good the information is. And so it's like, I think it's like the old story of Johnny Appleseed, who went around and he planted apple seeds wherever he went. He didn't go back and tilled the ground and made sure that he watered the plants so that they grew up to be trees. He just put the seeds out. Hopefully it was in good earth and allowed Mother Nature to do the rest. The most faith or religions have a similar thing. I know they do this with the Baha'i faith. You don't go out and try and convert people. You can present the information. If they say, humbug, I don't care, this isn't for me, you say, fine and dandy. Have a great day, and I wish you well. And you leave it at that. In other words, you don't try and convince somebody that your position is right and theirs is wrong. What you're doing is you offer it as a gift and say, take the time and think this over, and if it's something that agrees with you, you see something that that you particularly like about it, do some further investigation, and maybe it's for you. Otherwise, no worries. go and live your life to the best of your ability. Be the best person that you can be. So it's the same thing. It's the same thing with the UFO phenomena. I don't try and convince people. I just say, look, this is what I know. This is what my research is showing. And I share that with you.
I like that. So you would also probably agree with the fact that a believer is going to believe and a doubter will most likely always doubt. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. I mean, look, I have this kind of situation with my wife where I'm a hardcore believer. I base a lot of things on facts, the best available evidence. Her position is, well, yeah, there's got to be life in the universe. I mean, it's foolish not to think that there is. Are they out there coming to this planet? Are they looking for people down below trying to communicate who are barely out of the trees? I don't know, and maybe not, but that's her position, and so I don't try and convince her. She gets enough of that. I beat her up enough about this, and I just reached a point. There's no point in trying to do this. She's got to come to terms on her own way. And sooner or later, we're going to have all the information that we want, and then it becomes indisputable at that point.
And for Ron's show, it's called ERRT Radio. Ron, where can people listen to your show?
Oh, thank you. You can go to my website, www.errtradio.com. And from there, you can find a player right at the top of the page, and you sign up with your email or with your Facebook page, whatever you use the most. And then you can create your account, and you can listen to whenever we play. We play a lot of stuff. And like I said, on Friday nights, I usually sit around, and I've been interviewed Alan, actually, on Friday night. He was on my show once. And then
it's an eclectic mix. I really like it, Ron.
Thank you. And I appreciate it. More people would come by and check out what we're doing. And I think this week we're supposed to have Terry Lovelace on, and I actually just got his book, and he's another experiencer that had a real life experience. Right. And he shared me his book, and I've been just starting to read it tonight, and I tell you, now I got more questions already, and I haven't even gotten to chapter 1 yet.
Well, Ron, take some time to investigate my book on Amazon or Barnes & Noble and consider it. It's a big, big book, and you may be surprised to find out how much you already know that may be in there, as well as some things you didn't know that were in there.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'll do that. Thank you. And okay. Alan, thanks. You have a great night, and thank you, Terry, again for being a guest. And have a great night.
You too. Take care, Ron. Ron is it's an integral part of the KGRA paranormal community for sure. He's definitely part of the family, Terry. But to pick up where we left off before, I was curious about this idea of 0 point energy, and if these ETs, we're saying extraterrestrial, right? Off-world, off-Earth beings, if they are also part of this hierarchy of creation, and we are to presume they are evolved. I'm sure you've heard this question 1,000 times, but why aren't they just giving us 0 point energy? Why aren't they just intervening rather than just being like E.T. from the movie E.T. the Extraterrestrial, where they come, they take some plants, right, and then they take off? Why not really help us?
Yeah. I think Gene Roddenberry, the creator of Star Trek, had it right that there's a non-intervention clause by the higher planetary life forms or star systems. And that is, if you go in and you start to intervene and interrupt a civilization, then you have no idea how that civilization is going to turn out, or whether it's even supposed to exist. Mm-hmm. Maybe its existence is very short-lived. Maybe its existence is extremely ancient, which there are. There are some very ancient cultures or civilizations out there. Now, that doesn't mean that, for instance, if ETs came to this planet, that they can't kind of sort of inspire somebody to consider something, to investigate something. so that at least it's the human will feel that they are doing it. It's like again on the Star Trek movie where Scotty develops transparent aluminum and gives the formula to an engineer, and he said, "Oh my God, this works!" And obviously it does work. And now we even found out recently that somebody's developed transparent aluminum. So from the science fiction to the fact, or maybe it was already fact and it became science fiction. I don't know. But the point here being is that ETs have, I think when they're sufficiently evolved and mature, and they live on a planet where everyone gets along, where there is very little hostility or aggression, then what we find is that the ETs will start to engage us more and more, even on a physical level. In other words, we have to mature and become like adults. We're still acting like a bunch of adolescents, barely out of the trees. We're still finding that the way to solve problems is with aggression and a hostility. And when people say to me, well, aren't these ETs hostile? The proof is in the pudding. And so far, we haven't found any hostility from ETs. If they were hostile, I guarantee you, being that they are thousands to millions of years ahead of us, it would have been game, point, set, match, game over. That would have been it. Do ETs come here looking for our resources? Do they look for genetics specimens and all the rest of it? There's a possibility of that. But if you've gotten from, say, 50 light years across to here, I guarantee you don't come for the resources. Why? Because your transportation system has allowed you to get here, and your resources have provided that. So therefore, why would you need to go and take somebody else's resources from their planet, et cetera, et cetera? In other words, that again is human thinking, because we're still at that stage in our development where we are still mining, where we're still utilizing resources. Mm-hmm. But when we evolve to a state of higher consciousness, all of a sudden our brains start to do what our hands start to do. In other words, if you get an idea, let's say you're going to be creating a carving of some kind. Maybe it's a carving of a dog. Sure. And if you can imagine it in your head, it's already created. Even though you have done nothing, it's already created. Because you take the idea and you bring it into the state of causation, and you bring it into an astral form. And that astral form is very real. And then all you really do from there is to make it physical. And when we understand that our own physicality is nothing more than energy, and therefore everything we look around us is energy, not physical bricks and stones and mortar and all the rest of it. That's the senses, the physical senses that interact with those energy levels. So we can determine softness and hardness and all the rest of it, cold and hot. But the thing is, when you use the mind in a higher form, you can create a starship. And that starship, you can put whatever qualities you want into it, and it can become a living being.
So when you're saying a higher form, a mindset of a higher form, manifesting, what are you...
Yeah, but basically what they're doing is there are people already on this planet that can manifest something out of nothing. It can appear in their hand, and it's like it could be like a little rock crystal or some kind. I've heard of this, particularly some East Indian Sufis or shaman are like that, have been able to do that. But the thing is, it's very rare. There are some of us who have telepathic experiences. That's, again, another part of the higher consciousness. There are people who can move things with their mind. There are people who can see into the future. There are people who can look into the past and see the past. Because in reality, there is no time or space. And so what we see around us is really a construction of our 3D universe based on our senses, the senses of physicality and sight and hearing and taste and all the rest of it. So when you remove all of that, what's left? What's left is an energy form, a conscious, living, thinking, rational energy form. Aha! That's the same thing as the spirit, which is what religion's been saying for the last 10,000 years or more.
Right. That's some very powerful technique. And I have a hard time believing that humans are able to do that. There might have been that rare exception here or there, but I think as a whole, as a species, we probably have a long way to go before we can get to that point. And for me, it's even the science of the transporter from Star Trek is very weak. The idea of sort of breaking down all these molecules, transporting them, putting back together, and then a living being could just continue on as if it wasn't taken apart bit by bit. Maybe we'll get there someday. As far as I'm sure we'll be able to transport inanimate objects, but as far as biological thing, and then to manifest a ship of some sort that is biological in at least part of its makeup, that is really hard for me to wrap my brain around. I do want to ask you, though, in your book, do you have images of your own experiences or pictures to support your own personal contact?
This is the interesting thing, is that a lot of us, sometimes when we have these experiences, we don't always have a camera with us. And even when we have a camera with us, sometimes we forget to use it. My experience there, I have a drawing, and it's actually, I think it's in the second volume, where I talk about some of the researchers in the UFO community globally. And I've included myself in there. And I figured, well, if I wrote 6 books, I might as well include myself as a researcher. And I draw in a picture of what I remember as a 5-year-old having these ET beings come through the wall, and other things like that. For instance, trying to snap a picture of an extraterrestrial is extremely difficult, particularly if you don't know when it's going to show up or how it will show up and on all the rest of it. For instance, I understand that the CSETI groups that Dr. Greer runs, they have 2 photographs, and one is a being that looks like he's sort of coming out of something, and he's right above a bunch of chairs, and it's at nighttime. And the person that took it, who I did meet at the time, said that she felt compelled to point her camera in a certain position or a certain direction and snap a picture. And a lot of people do, that I now talk to and have heard, is they do something very similar. They feel like they're being told subliminally or through some kind of telepathy to do this, and they will capture a picture. It could be a picture of a UFO or an extraterrestrial vehicle, or it could be an ET. There's another one that seems to show a being of radiant light, and when you play with the picture a little bit, you can see roughly where the head is and the body, and I think there's even some eyes there. But that's an indication of what they call a light being. Now, is that a real physical being who's at the crossing point of light between interdimensionality and physicality? That's a possibility. I've also found that there's a similar picture like that on Mars, no less. And NASA talked about it, and the news carried it for a while. And they said they thought it was a glare coming up from some kind of a rock formation.
Yeah.
But that's when you blow it up and compare it with the one that was taken on Earth, you're going to say, I think this is E.T. In other words,
you could overlay those images, and they would.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's in book 5 or volume 5. I've actually found creatures on Mars as well as a large humanoid body, and this is beyond any doubt whatsoever, because I compared it to a human corpse and cadaver, fossilized and what have you. It's not a pile of rock. It's not pareidolia of light and shadow and things that resemble certain things. It's exactly what it looks like. And I've seen what people claim is machinery and beings and all the rest of it. But quite frankly, I'm a bit of a hardcore skeptic too. But I like to think I'm a healthy skeptic. In other words, if you show me enough stuff, I may be convinced, or I may want to do further research.
Okay. Well, and I have another question here from you, because we only got a couple of minutes left.
Go for it.
This is from Maria. Are people manifesting abductions?
Manifesting, meaning they want to be abducted?
I don't know if the intent is there, but whether they are doing it themselves unconsciously or not, I don't know if that's what's behind the question.
Well, I've heard
it's possible.
Yeah, I've heard that sometimes it's all about a mental mindset, and which says that if you go out there peacefully, you have peaceful experiences. If you go out there rather negative and you encounter these things may be negative. What I have found is that in my experiences and the people that have been with me at the time, is that our experiences are positive, and they don't always happen just because we want them. In other words, ETs are not there to amuse us. That's the whole point. We cannot just say, okay, here's a bunch of us. We're out here. We're meditating. We're shooting off our lasers and playing our beeps and tones. Why aren't you showing up? That's the wrong attitude. If our attitudes are pure and our motives are sincere, then, and if it's like, we wish to establish a greater brotherhood, not only amongst ourselves, but with the beings from other places, then there's a good chance that we'll experience something like that. And so then it becomes a nice surprise, and we allow the ETs to be the lead dancer in that scenario. We don't force anything onto them. We don't ask questions of them like, hi, where are you from, and what's the nature of your propulsion system? Those kinds of questions will get you the wrong attention from the military.
Terry, thank you so much for coming on tonight. I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. And again, citizens' disclosure on UFOs and ETI, global evidence of UFOs and ETI presence, Volume 1 is available at Barnes & Noble and Amazon and Indigo and BAM, or Billion Books, Books of a Million, and many, many, many other distributors.
All right. Fascinating subject. And it's an evolving subject. With each year that goes on, we hear more and more reports of this So we'll have to touch base again in the future, Terry.
I hope so. Yeah, because by that time I'll have book 2 out.
another 10th, so we're at 20,000 pages then, huh?
Yeah. Well, they're already written. That's the whole thing. They're just ready to be printed.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, thanks, Terry. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Alan.
Thank you to everyone tuning in tonight. I really appreciate you all supporting this program, Paranormal Now. And of course, here on the KGRA platform, it's one cool place to hang out. I love doing this. So join us next week again, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on KGRAradio.com, your official contact for the best in alternative talk radio. To find out more, you can go to paranormalnow.net, my own site, or go to Twitter at paranormal_now for show updates and news. And just a little bit, you've got Fade to Black with Jimmy Church coming up, so hang in there. And a special thanks to KGRA producer Race Hobbs. And until next time, live in the mystery.